can see we got a fair bit of coverage from the trees right around here. We had a dusting of sort of wet snow last night, and right here, I don't know how well you can see it, right there, all around here, right 2 feet in front of my shelter, is rabbit dung, rabbit pellets, all over here. You can probably see the trail that goes right there and all up through there and off, and then it turns out that way. And again, rabbit poop all over the place here. So I won't have far to go if I want something to eat. I want to talk a little bit today about staying warm, or staying safe, more especially in cold weather. And not everybody, I realize, lives in areas that are as cold as this or anywhere close to it. Maybe a few that are colder, but it's something that's really important. Hypothermia is probably the thing. I mean, you can go 3 days, they say, without water, although I'm sure that's pushing it, because after a day or two your capacity is diminished, your mental capacity from thirst. And it depends on your area, how hot it is and how dry it is. You can go, again, 3 weeks without food or even more, but after 4 or 5 days, again, your mental capacity diminishes and you're less able to take care of yourself. But hypothermia, that can do you in just a couple of 5 minutes or less. So when you're outdoors, I've seen all kinds of different videos and so on, and I'm not picking on anybody or mentioning any names, but there's all kinds of gear and shelters that they build, and lean-to shelters with brush and so on. And I have a bit of a different opinion about that. This plastic here, you can see I finally got it on, is just 6 mil vapor barrier that you use building a house, but it's completely windproof. In fact, if this whole thing was sealed around in here, it would be completely windproof. It's only because it's open that it's not. This will stop the transfer of air. No matter how thick you've got branches on there, air and breezes and stuff are still going to seep through all the little branches and cracks, and you're never going to retain the heat that, if you have a fire, you're never going to retain much of the heat that you're getting. So the other thing I see is the people with the space blankets, and a lot of them are just the Mylar blankets. Nothing wrong with that. Mylar, it's tissue paper thin almost, and it does a good job, but you have to bear in mind there's 3 forms of heat, but the 2 we're thinking about is conduction and radiation. The heat that you feel from a fire when it's burning in front of you is heat that's radiating out from that fire. Conduction is when you grab something hot, like the hot handle of a pan, and burn your fingers. That's because it conducts the heat directly to your hand. And I've seen people, now this is one of the light tarps, 5x7 with the shiny inside. These are real handy, 5x7, but what I've seen, and I'll only open it up partly here just to show, but I've seen people put these things around them, over their shoulders, and wrap up tight in them, and that doesn't allow them to do their job. This reflective material is designed to radiate the heat from the fire as it comes past you, and then behind you radiate it back and keep it closer around your body. If you've pulled this material tight to your body, look at how thin it is, and Mylar is so much thinner. There's no insulative value in this, none at all. So what happens is, if you've pulled it tight to your body, it can't radiate the heat back as efficiently, but it will conduct the cold through the plastic. Usually it's tight across your shoulders. That's where you're going to get the most of that conduction. It's going to come right through and into your shoulders, into your neck, and you're not going to stay warm for very long if that happens. And your clothes are by far your first line of, and really your only line of defense about keeping warm. All these other things that you take with you, any shelters you might build, any of that type of stuff, this is basically used to protect, for the most part, the clothing that you're wearing so it can continue to do its job efficiently. If your clothing gets wet because it's snowing, or raining or whatever, it diminishes its ability to insulate you from that cold. And if you get wet, then you're in serious trouble. So what these things do really is provide shelter to keep the elements off you as much as possible so that your clothing can do what it's supposed to do. That's your first and most important thing, and you always want to dress like an onion. I've seen people out there with big heavy snowmobile suits on. The problem with that is if you're working around and you start to get hot, you've either got to unzip it and peel the top down and then you're too cold, or you zip it back up and you perspire, and that little bit of perspiration against your body, if it starts to freeze when you quit working and you're not generating the heat anymore, again, that can be big trouble. Whereas something like this, I've got my jacket, I can take this off, I've still got the top of my coveralls in this case, I've got a shirt. Now it's not that cold today, so I didn't wear. Normally this might be a wool sweater. Underneath this I've just got a short sleeve t-shirt, but again, that could be a long sleeve base layer, thermal base layer. And I can take one layer off or a second layer off and adjust my temperature so that I can work comfortably and just stay slightly cool, comfortable, so I can work without generating any sweat. And then when I stop doing that, I can start layering gradually back up as I need in order to keep the warmth. So this, now because of the reflective quality of this, it's a little bit better than just protection from the wind or the rain, if you use it properly. But that's a good thing to have, and I carry that with me all the time. The other thing that I like to carry with me a lot is extra clothes. Take an extra pair of gloves or mitts, whichever the case is, because if you're out here and you're working around picking up firewood or whatever, the snow is on the wood, it's wet, everything here is wet, you can see that, and your gloves get wet, and then your fingers are going to be cold. So have a spare pair of gloves that you can put on afterwards. This is one of those little neck warmers, goes on over your head like this, and it's a great thing also. I took the snowmobile helmet off, but I've always got my again, it's not that hot today, but I've got a little toque, and that's kind of handy to have. And something else that I made, let's just pay attention to our stuff here so we get our tea going. I'll have to get some more wood here in a moment. This is a bag I've made. It's the same canvas that I made my rucksack out of. And this is a rucksack. One of the videos I've got is how I stitched up this bag. And it's a big, about 45 liters I think I measured it out at. This is the same stuff. Both of them have been treated with beeswax mixed with a little bit of linseed oil just to thin it. But this bag has kind of a handy addition to it. Its primary function is a bag, of course. But with this one, the top folds open like a transformer bag. And then you invert the bottom part inside out, like this, and like that. You get there. There, doesn't have to be perfect. Now this is going to look kind of goofy, but you got to bear in mind that it is a bag. I'm going to take my glasses off for this. So, if it's really cold and things are getting out of control, maybe a lot of times I'll have a balaclava, especially when I'm riding, but not always. If it's getting really blizzardy and I'm cold and I've only got this for warmth, again, I need that protective layer to keep this from getting wet. So this bag now becomes I'll keep this down so I can talk, but this becomes my protection. It looks like I got mouse ears or something. I feel like I'm part of the Mickey Mouse Club. Probably look Mickey Mouse too. But anyways, it's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? But it works, and its primary function is a bag, so it's hardly styled. If I wanted to make this just a hood, I would have stitched it up in a nicer shape. But it works. So I have it with me. I didn't have anything in it today. I took the stuff out of it simply because it's easier to show it when I don't have to pile things out of it and stack them up on my little bench here. So that works really well. Another thing that's very handy to have with you, actually I have a tarp in the sleigh here that I tow in with me. I'll show you that here in a moment. But another thing that I like to have with me is the big green contractor's garbage bag. I had it with me yesterday and I didn't put it back in the sled today. But it's huge. It's basically a green garbage bag, but it's a really big green garbage bag. It's about this wide, and from the ground it will come up to about my chin. And it's made out of a correspondingly heavier material than a normal green garbage bag because of its size. And they're a contractor's garbage bag because, well, for obvious reasons, because contractors tend to use them. They call them drum liners sometimes. But that bag is handy as anything because, again, to protect your main source of warmth, you can take the bag at the bottom of it, slit a little hole, pull it over your head like a poncho, and it'll go right over heavy clothes. It's big enough, even for me, and I'm almost 6 feet tall and 220 pounds. But it'll go right over a heavy coat and right down and down to or below your knees. So that really will protect you, and all you've got is just a little hole in the top big enough to pop your head through. That will really keep you well protected both from the wind. It will retain, it blocks the wind. It'll retain your body heat inside. And in fact, if you've got that and something like this that you can sort of put loosely around you, and don't pull it tight, as I was saying, even if you put an evergreen bough or something and just let it sort of sit over your shoulders and then pull this around so that it's got that little cushion of airspace in there, that's all you really need. Doesn't have to be much, just don't pull it tight. If you're building a shelter in a situation like, there's a lot of sphagnum moss here. Everything here is sphagnum moss. It's kind of a cross between boreal forest and taiga. And sphagnum moss has a higher R value, insulation R value, per inch than the fiberglass insulation bats that you put in the walls of your house. You know, you get 4 inches of insulation in your house, it's about R12. So 4 inches, you get about an R3 roughly per inch of that fiberglass matting or batting or whatever you want to call it. Sphagnum moss has about a 3.5 R value, or almost 4 per inch of its thickness and so on. So if you have the opportunity to do that, that's great. You can take that bag, and I would, instead of slitting the hole in it, if you've got something like this as well, stuff it full of that moss. And then you can either, and then just roll the end of it, seal it up a little bit. Then you can either sit on it, and it'll insulate you from the damp and the cold ground. You could also lie down on it, because like I said, the thing is, you know, 4.5 feet long, so you could do a pretty good job laying down on it. This fire is, the wind keeps shifting here, and it's causing my teeth. Come on, warm up, teeth. Let's move these things out here a little bit. See if we can focus the fire closer to where we actually want it. So those are the things that, I mean, there's so many more things, you know, it's endless what you can do, but those are the things that you really want to have. And it's light to carry. That contractor's bag, for its size, weighs an ounce, if, you know, they're nothing. This thing, again, you know, it weighs nothing. This thing probably weighs, you know, several ounces at the most. So it doesn't take very much to do that. Make sure also that you've got a good fire kit with you. And have 2 or 3 ways of making fire. I rely primarily on the ferro rod because it's just about bulletproof. But, you know, sometimes when you're setting up yourself, it's after the emergency's already happened. And if that's the case, your hands are cold, if you've fallen through the ice, for example, or whatever, and you're cold and you're chilled and you're numb and your hands are getting stiff and cold, you know, you're trying to save yourself after the incident. And so to prep yourself up like this is going to be 10 times harder than if it was done prior to having to need it. So in that case, I carry the little hand warmers. The little hot spots or whatever you call them, you tear the package open, there's a couple little pieces in there you put inside your gloves for your hands. Something like that can be a lifesaver. You may not be able to start a fire when your hands are frozen, nearly frozen solid. But if you can get those little hot spots, unwrap a couple of them, you can, if you've got several, I carry like half a dozen of them, you can put them in your boots. There are large ones for your boots, for your feet. The small ones will warm your hands up inside your gloves, or even just hang on to it just long enough to get the feeling back in your hands so that they'll move, then you can light your fire. The other thing you can do, you can put them inside your jacket, you know, in around your neck where the carotid arteries are. That will keep your neck warm, the arteries, warms the blood, transfers it somewhat through your body. That's all helpful. Any of these things that you can do is a good thing. So just, and you know, again, a few ounces to put them in a pack. Like they're about, you could probably put 4 or 5 of them in a cigarette pack. So there's not much to it. There's no problem there having that. Whew. There we go. Get some honey in here. Here's another thing. I like to carry some tea with me, whatever you want, as long as it's not alcohol. Alcohol will flush the heat from your core, which is where it really needs to be, out to the extremities. And if you're really cold and you're still outdoors where you can't get adequate shelter, that heat that's flushed from your core to your extremities dissipates a lot faster into the cold air than what it does if you don't have the alcohol. So alcohol is not a good thing to have. You may get that initial feeling, that flush of warmth, but it's a false thing. There we go. It's a false feeling. It's not really going to help you any, and in reality, not only will it not help you, but you know, you can cause yourself to be even worse off than ever by having it. So that's not a good thing, and I didn't bring a spoon. So we'll just take a quick second here, fashion up a bit of a spoon. All right. There we go. Clean that up a little bit. Good. So now the honey will be all set to go. So that's really about all I've got to deal with, you know, on the basics level. There, you know, you can go a lot further into it than that, of course, but that really, if you've got that part done, and you've got these things with you that I'm mentioning, and you're prepared for that type of thing, that's enough to generally, unless the horrendous situation, sometimes there's just nothing you can do, but you know, hopefully we don't get to that ever. But these things will be enough to get you out of a mess. You know, all you've got to do, generally speaking, and we're not talking about survival in the terms of being out for a week or something like that, hopefully. What we're talking about is getting through the day, through the night perhaps, until you can either get yourself organized, get yourself warmed up, maybe use some of those dry clothes that you carry in a pack and change up enough to get yourself in good shape, and then you get yourself out of there. If not, worst comes to worst, you have to wait for somebody to come and get you. Hopefully somebody knows where you are, and that won't be a big problem. With something like this, you can just sit here, enjoy the time. The plastic comes up far enough that when I'm sitting, and if it drips or comes down, it's going to come down, you know, a foot out in front of me. You know, in a pinch, you could actually lie down on this, wrap up in, if you had enough gear with you, and have a nap. You know, do an overnighter here, and especially if you carried extra plastic or that tarp I've got there, you could tuck it over the top and drop it down the front to really cover the wind off. Now, again, it would be open on the ends. You're not going to generate any heat, but you will block the wind. And if you dress warm enough and maybe have some extra gear with you just for emergencies, it might be an option. It's probably not the greatest option in most cases because, you know, there's really not going to be a proper heat source there. Also, this plastic here, just before we go, this plastic here, I've seen a lot of people make, what do they call them, super shelters. And they use this plastic on the back and then they cover it with their duff and so on for camouflage. That's great. That's good. As long as you've got this, you seal the ends in and you make it as airtight as you can. And then they take this and they bring it down the front. And so the fire is on the outside and it radiates the heat through this plastic and warms up your super shelter. That's fine, but it's not the most efficient. The more opaque this polyplastic is, the less radiated, it's kind of like a line of sight thing. The less radiated heat is going to be able to get through it. And I've heard some people say, well, you just have to get a thicker material. Exactly the opposite of that. The thicker it is, the more opaque it is, the less radiation is going to be, radiated heat is going to be able to pass through it. What you want is something that's clear as glass, and you can get like a vinyl material. The problem with vinyl is that it gets very brittle in the cold, and it won't, you can't move it, you can't roll it, it cracks and so on. But there is something that you can get called polyethylene vinyl acetate, and it's absolutely clear like glass. And the beauty of that is that it stays completely supple even in the very, very cold weather. You can roll it back up, you can roll it down, it doesn't get brittle in the cold, maybe in 50 below or something, but generally speaking it's very good. And the beauty of it is it's inexpensive and it's easy to get. In our country, here in Canada, you go to Walmart and you get a shower curtain, and the shower curtain, generally a cheap one, would be vinyl, which is what you don't want. And you can get a shower curtain like that for like $8 or $9 or whatever. You can go to Walmart and get a shower curtain made out of the polyethylene vinyl acetate for about $12. So it's still cheap. And a shower curtain, what is it, like 5 feet by 5 feet or something? So you've got enough to put a pretty decent front on your shelter. And when you get that shower curtain, it will probably just say PEVA, P-E-V-A, polyethylene vinyl acetate. They probably won't have the long form on it, but just look for PEVA. And again, it's cheap, it's available easily, and it works awesome. So if you've got that rolled down the front here and your fire on the outside, you can actually, if this is sealed up airtight enough without gaps and whatever around your branches, and tuck it in as tight as you can, you can get a shelter like this, even at 30 below. You can get a shelter like this at 70 degrees, and I've done it. You can sit in there in a t-shirt. So as long as you keep your fire going, you can stay in there, you know, indefinitely. You're getting such a small space. So anyways, I think that's it. I'm going to stop gabbing here. I'm going to drink my tea, and then I'm going to tidy up and go home and get the dogs. Part of my trip out, I guess yesterday, it was late when I was leaving here, and it was pretty much dark before I left. So the ride home is several kilometers, and it was in the dark, which makes some pretty cool. I videoed it, so that makes some pretty good footage too. So this is pretty much the end of the talking portion, but if you're interested in seeing some pretty neat riding, I'll put several minutes of that in at the end, and if you want to carry on and watch it all, that's great, and if not, that's fine too. So thanks for watching. Always glad you can join me. I always appreciate it. And for anybody who hasn't subscribed, if you like what you saw, please hit the subscribe button, and also ring the little bell so that you'll get notified whenever any other videos come out. And certainly if you've got any friends that are into this kind of thing, share it with them so that they'll also know. And everybody have a safe day, safe week. We'll see you all the next time. And just absolutely silent. Oh man, that's awesome. Oh, chickadee.
pretty rough. Hope there aren't any moose out here. That would really suck.